Hey guys, this is Pablo with Meditation Amsterdam, back with another video around the topics of self-cultivation, self-realization, as we tend to discuss in this channel. And today I want to dive once again into what it is that our sense of self is made of. And this is an insight that arises as you do self-inquiry, as you ask the question, who am I, or what am I? Or to phrase it in a different way, what do I mean when I say I? What is the sense of self actually made of? And well, so to begin with, the mind resists that inquiry every step of the way because it doesn't want to be found out. The sense of self is a protective shield that doesn't permit you to see the very things that you've been repressing to protect yourself, especially early on in life. So the process requires quite a bit of persistence, but if you do persist, you come across the inevitable realization that the sense of self is a kind of opinion-based membrane that creates the idea of an alternative version of reality and how things could have been, should have been, or could or should be. In other words, our very sense of self, our very sense of being an individual, a separate individual self, rests squarely on the notion that we can, and in fact need, to have an opinion about how things could or should be, other than simply letting them be as they are. This is very tricky in the sense that letting things simply be as they are requires a nervous system that has been clarified of its subconscious content and and has become familiarized and harmonized with its own negative affects and negative self-perceptions and so on. So it's not just something that we can directly do in a sense. Because that very doing would be misguided by many unconscious and repressed desires and fears and beliefs that we have. So letting things be as they are is in fact the tallest order in spiritual development. And it's in a sense ironic because to just let things be as they are sounds like the simplest thing in the world, and it sounds as if nothing needs to be done to just let things be as they are, live and let live. But to, in fact, actually do that, to have the mind cease in its opinion-making compulsions is quite a task, as a matter of fact. So, I suppose if we were to try to understand this, at least from a logical or a practical perspective, it would suffice to say that reality doesn't even use our opinion as toilet paper, right? Our opinion has no bearing in the way that things unfold other than as a narration and a sort of abuse of the ability to imagine alternative scenarios in which we come out on top, to put it in a certain way. So if we listen to the late Nisargadatta Maharaj, he would say that we suffer due to excess of imagination and lack of attention. So that's to say that our capacity and ability to create alternative scenarios very quickly gets co-opted into a what-if making machine or a should making machine. In other words, we start to judge the way things are, even though they already are that way. And that's what I meant by saying that reality doesn't use our opinion even as toilet paper, right? Like that would already be giving it too much credit, because our opinion has absolutely no bearing in the way things already are. So from a logical and practical perspective, judging the way things actually are in the now is really a self-defeating and fantasy engaging exercise, but we engage in it nonetheless. And there is a kind of compulsive need to pass judgment of things being good and bad, good or bad, desirable or non-desirable, craving and aversion, and our entire life is lived between these two very narrow banks of experience. And then what happens is, of course, in order to pass judgment, you need to pretend that there is an observer who is watching things and passing judgment, and an observer who is apart from experience, or an observer or a receiver to whom experience is happening. In other words, the moment we pass judgment on experience, or even just become the observer of experience, we are already creating a certain duality in which there is a subject and an object, and we are creating a situation in which we are not equal to experience, but rather there is an us that is separate, isolated, and foreign to experience, and we are in relationship to that experience as opposed to being integrally one with it. And as I said, this is a compulsive mechanism, and it is a mechanism that is buttressed by survivalistic wiring that kicks in very, very early on, when we are in a completely dependent state of affairs, physically and emotionally, vis-a-vis our parents or our caretakers. So it's very difficult to outsmart, well, in fact, it is impossible to outsmart, but to weed this out and clarify it is a very challenging endeavor, because it becomes utterly compulsive, and in fact, it is seen as a natural state of affairs in our society. To pass judgment and to have opinions is, in fact, seen as quite, I would say, a very admired attribute. And to voice them assertively is even higher, right? So not only do we not value people who can shut the hell up, but that in fact mentate and ideate and fantasize compulsively is seen as something positive, because we give great prevalence to the thinking mechanism of the mind. So I was thinking that ironically that whole Zen koan of if a tree falls in the forest and nobody's there to hear it, does it really make a sound? I came up with a new one, which is, if a tree falls in the forest and someone is there to hear it, can they withhold opinion about it? And the answer is no, because the moment there is a someone, there is an opinion at hand already. In other words, it is opinion that creates the someone there to hear it in the first place. And so the self and opinion co-arise together. The self, or the separate self, and judgment are one and the same thing. And so the other interesting element in this, since we are all in one way or another trying to get in touch with that which is eternal, if you will, is that time is created by the opinion-making machine. So it creates a self, but it also creates time. So it creates a self trapped in time. And this is inevitable because the what-ifs that we create and the shoulds that we create are either reminiscing or regretting the past, or wishing for or dreading certain outcomes in the future. In other words, if you observe really closely at your fantasy making tendencies and your judgment tendencies, we never fantasize about how the very present could or should be. It's always somewhere else in time and space that fantasy is playing out. So So opinions create time. And equally interesting, or the opposite of that very same phenomenon, is that the cessation of the opinion making machine brings you into an eternal now. We tend to confuse eternity with foreverness, but it's not foreverness in time, it's not ceaseless time. It is actually the absence of time. It is a space, if we can call it that, in which the march of time as created by our fantasy making thoughts has completely ceased. So we find ourselves suddenly squarely parked in an eternal now. Um, and to the mind, that can be very eerie and very off putting, because in the eternal now, where no opinion exists, we don't exist either as a separate self. We merge with the now, we become the now when our opinions cease. And that's where we come to see that the eternal now, which is equal to the higher self, is the antithesis of a separate self and the antithesis of having an opinion of how things could or should be, or what if they were any other way than they actually are. When this happens, or the more we touch that space and the more we become acquainted with it and acclimatize to it, because it can be a very shrill and eerie space for the ego, that is, for the parts of the ego that are still active, we start to very quickly become familiar with a very profound realization, which is that it was our opinion making that was causing all the pain that we've ever inflicted upon ourselves. In other words, there are only two thoughts, if we can call them that, or two opinions might be a way to call them, but I would say two positionalities of the mind that are opposite to the typical judgment activity. And they are, to my mind, saying simply an open and complete yes, or a thank you. So yes and thank you to the way things actually are right here and now is the only available move left at one point or another. Because we, through experimentation and the use of our attention, have clarified the mind and come to notice that whenever we say no, or place judgment, or depart away from the way things actually are, we introduce friction and suffering into the system, into our mind, into ourselves, by separating ourselves. So this compulsive need to be a separate self that can fend off reality comes immediately with pain as a consequence, and there is no way to resolve it other than to relinquish the opinion making tendency and to rest in the now as it is. Now, as I said, this is not a command to do so, or it's not even a suggestion, or I don't even imply by this that you should try to do so. It is an invitation to embark in the cultivation activities that will result in that as an outcome that is indirectly achieved. But it is achievable. It's not even imaginable, but it is achievable, as the Course in Miracles would say. Because the mind cannot imagine how to do this. Every piece of imagination or thought or idea that the mind concocts is, in a sense, a rejection of the way things are already. Nor am I under any illusion that explaining this as clearly as I can muster will make you or anyone suddenly drop their either embark on cultivation or drop their opinion making. But I'm hoping that it would be an invitation to start noticing the effects that this has, and noticing them systematically and relentlessly. That's the only way to almost munch our way out of that mind-made prison, which is made up of our own opinions. So the separate self that we believe ourselves we are, and that we believe needs to be preserved, is made up of nothing but judgments and opinions about the way things already are. And it depends on that separation and that should and what if fabrication to remain existing. Excuse me. Drink some water here. And that's the essential message today. It's one in which, through long and hard observation, we come to realize that in the way of Star Trek, resistance is futile. You are better off taking the now for what it is. I should probably be doing that right now. But because opinion making, fantasizing, and selfing has a payoff, because let's not kid ourselves, there is a payoff to fantasizing. It is a repressive and suppressive mechanism that cuts us away from pain that needs to be experienced. Because it has that payoff, we need to go through a bit of a crucible of pain and learn to transcend our need to not feel, in essence. My God, I'm losing my voice here. Thanks for listening so far. I hope the message was good. I'm gonna call it a video. Do like, share, and subscribe if you like it. Curious to hear what you make of it, and I'll be back with the next one pretty soon. Bye-bye.